A lot of buildings that met the code collapsed.
A natural disaster hits Los Angeles, and lots of stars of the day are caught up in small moments of terror, heroism, and whatever the hell Walter Matthau is doing.
I'm sorry. It's been a hell of a day.
Do the shake, it's Earthquake.
I know you'll laugh, but I think we're going to have a really big quake.
Earthquake is a 1974 epic disaster film where Los Angeles is hit by the big one. Well, if not the big one, at least a pretty big one. There's also the unmentioned secondary disaster, fashion.
That's right.
Earthquakes in real life are a fairly common occurrence. Large ones can be incredibly deadly, so we are not making light of earthquakes in the real world, which of course are deadly and tragic. But we are having a little bit of fun with a 1970s blockbuster from the era of polyester, pollution, and Paul McCartney and Wings.
Hey, did you feel that tremor this morning?
It really wasn't very strong.
Disaster films have always been a thing. It's just that the type of disaster portrayed would change from decade to decade. Universal Studios hit pay dirt with its 1970 film Airport, which mixed an ensemble cast of big stars just on the other side of their career peak, playing character archetypes dealing with their own soap opera-style problems. Of course, while there's this whole disaster aspect to sort out, producer Irwin Allen refined the formula with his films The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno, which were huge hits. All of these mixed famous faces trying not to shit their pants in the face of probable doom, while audiences were also trying to hold it in. Also, many of these films contained the disaster or impending disaster to a small area, one vessel or a building. Compared to Earthquake, however, those other 70s disaster films are no great shakes. Who needs Godzilla or aliens when tectonic plates grind against each other like randy teenagers? I said keep the door open.
What in God's name do we do now?
We warn people.
Earthquake follows the 70s disaster movie formula pretty faithfully. The first part of the film sets up all of the interpersonal relationships and which characters are linked and how. You also have to have people sounding warnings. Warnings which are of course ignored.
Just a little tremor, that's a solid concrete dam.
And then after disaster has struck, the big stars take charge.
Our big star, you, makes his appearance.
Charlton Heston is Graf, who works for a construction company and is in a dead-end marriage to Remy, played by Ava Gardner. She fakes a suicide attempt after an argument.
Of course I'll induce vomiting. I know the rules by now.
But an earthquake tremor hits at this point. Look, I'm sure it's fine and nothing will come of it. Graf happens to be working for Remy's father, Royce, played by Lorne Greene, despite Greene only being a few years older than both Heston and Gardner. Remy thinks Graf is having an affair with Denise, a recent widow, single mother and aspiring actress.
And the character I'm playing is also supposed to be an infomaniac.
He wasn't, but then he was. Denise was portrayed by Geneviève Bujold, future star of films like Coma, and very nearly the murderer of Tuvix. He wants to shack up with Denise in Oregon, because at the time they wouldn't have had to pump their own gas. But he's given a promotion by his possibly soon-to-be ex-father-in-law, a situation more awkward than having a fender bender with somebody who's just mugged you.
That kind of a script.
Graf tells his biggest client that they need to start going beyond the standard building code. But his client seems to be in not too much of a hurry to do anything about that. I wonder if that's in any way going to come back to haunt him a little later on.
It's Zsa Zsa Gabor.
George Kennedy is Slade, a suspended cop. A post-shaft Richard Roundtree is a motorbike daredevil Quaid.
Now there has never ever been anything like this.
This intense and insecure creep Jody, played by Marjoe Gortner, the king of characters you love to hate, is a grocery clerk who has the hots for shopper Rosa, played by future Dallas star Victoria Principal, who's also the sister of a guy working with Quaid.
What?
Meanwhile, workers at the dam are worried something's about to go wrong, especially when one of them drowns in an elevator.
What's your point? Bill, we live in an earthquake zone.
Meanwhile, a seismologist has done calculations indicating that it's probably not the best time to invest in a high-rise condominium. The big one hits, and it's not just a big one, it's a doozy. But then, the big doozy as a way to describe a massive seismological event doesn't really put the wind up anyone. Also, it looks a bit shitty on a movie poster. The movie then switches to the rescue and recovery phase. A makeshift emergency centre is assembled in a building built by Heston and Greene's company, And then of course an aftershock hits. The army has called up its reservists, which gives insecure Jody an M16. And he tries it on with Rosa before Slade intervenes. Marjoe Gortner, the former preacher, plays villains so well that it's always intensely satisfying when his characters get knocked off. Denise's kid is unconscious, with downed power lines sparking all around him. Quaid and Rosa's brother help out. Back at the emergency centre, Lorne Greene's dead, a phrase you normally only hear during a drought, and he is the first major casualty of a speaking part. The aftershock hits, collapsing the emergency centre, leaving Slade and Graff to tunnel in and rescue everyone without knowing that a wall of water is coming. Remy is carried away by the water and Graff jumps in after her. The film sort of ends with a shot of LA looking pretty devastated. The upshot is it's a buyer's market if you're looking for a fixer-upper.
This used to be a hell of a town all of a sudden.
Disaster films always seem to be about the toss of a coin. Will your favourite star survive, or will they die horribly? As we said, Earthquake differed from other disaster films to this point by spreading the devastation out over a much larger area. We're never given a body count, but considering the damage we see, it's probably higher than the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno combined and multiplied by a factor of 100.
This guy threw me out of the elevator, and then I heard all those people screaming!
Probably the first time the old bastard ever did anybody a favor.
The film takes great delight in sending anonymous characters played by an army of stunt performers to their doom, though by the end a few of the lead characters don't make it. Graff, Remy, Royce, and the creepy sex pest guy.
What I really want to do is open a karate school.
I've been discovering and rediscovering certain films in different genres. In this case, the 70s disaster film. Some of them I know from screenings on television. Some of them I'm seeing in full for the first time now. So watching Earthquake for this review was the first time that I'd seen the whole thing start to finish. And I have to say, so far it's a personal favourite of the 70s disaster film genre. The effects mainly hold up. The practical destruction effects are mainly done very well. There's a mix of model work, matte effects, optically composited shots, a lot of redressing of the studio backlot to look like a destroyed city, and lots of camera shaking. I mean, a lot of camera shaking. A special camera mount was developed for the shaky cam shots during the earthquake. Some sets were built on moving platforms. Either that or Lorne Greene was learning how to do the hustle.
This is an emergency.
What isn't after an earthquake? Go back or take them to a Hare Krishna temple.
There are also a few effects that don't work as well. Using a reflection from a flexible mirror to warp the buildings. And one scene in particular was handled so incredibly poorly that it will immediately take you out of the film. Just after the quake, an elevator cable snaps, sending its occupants to the bottom of the shaft in seconds, in one of the film's biggest effects failures. All of this was done on a $7 million budget, which sounds piddling, but it made more than 10 times that at the box office, becoming one of the biggest releases of 1974. Disaster movies were more than just a disaster, but a big disaster surrounded by clusters of smaller disasters, which does sound suspiciously like the time I attempted to circumnavigate New Zealand's South Island in a Zodiac while dressed as a hedgehog.
The chances are 100 to 1 that everybody in that building is dead.
Films like this would throw minor disasters, trials, tribulations, poor judgment, and just plain bad luck at a wall and see what stuck. And then they would do the same thing with casting, picking a bunch of names out of a hat and seeing who was available for the money they were offering.
That's really nice of you.
And then once you finalised your cast with a mix of rising stars and folks whose star power was just starting to dim, you then shoehorned in George Kennedy, since he was in more of these films than pretty much anyone else.
All right, maybe that was dumb of me, but that's the way I figured.
Canadian filmmaker Mark Robson had had a long career in the movies as a producer and a director, where he could swap between melodramas and action films in the same way a cat can switch between nuzzling up to you on a cold morning to shredding your face because you didn't get out of bed fast enough to feed it half an hour before sunrise. The film was in a race to reach theatres before Irwin Allen and John Gilliman's film The Towering Inferno. Godfather writer Mario Puzo co-wrote the script, and his plot was much bigger than the final shooting script. Puzo was contractually obligated to work on a sequel to The Godfather, so his work was taken over by writer George Fox, who worked with Robson to get the film into a more, how shall we say, manageable shape for shooting. By manageable, we mean cheaper. As it was, the film's first act was much longer, but when people go to a disaster movie, they really go to see celebrities getting crushed or burned or drowned or fall to their doom, rather than Ava Gardner freaking out over an early morning tremor. The cast are pretty solid for the most part. Most of the characters seem to keep their wits about them for most of the film, so it is actually left to extras and minor characters to convey much of the terror of being caught up in an event like this. When some of the major characters die off, these scenes don't appear to be milked for as much drama as you might expect, given the way that the film opens. So it has to be said, the real stars were the extras and stunt people, getting creamed, crushed, squashed, stabbed, drowned, splattered, pureed, and what have you.
Mom, I'm flying!
All for our entertainment. What a bunch of sickos. And what the hell is Walter Matthau up to? He plays no part of the story, and he's just there in the background, dressed as a pimp, getting quietly drunk or entertaining people. Apparently, the actor appeared as a favour to producers, since the film has little other comic relief.
I guess it's part of this nostalgia binge everybody's on.
Composer John Williams had worked on a number of disaster films, and his work was always solid. His music for Earthquake would come only a little while before he'd have to start working on Jaws, which would begin his transformation from gigging composer to musical deity firing thunderbolts of joy towards your ears. Earthquake was the first movie released to feature Sense-Around. At a time when most movies were mixed in stereo at best and quite often were seen with monophonic sound, Sense-Around was an early form of subwoofer that, when the scene called for the earthquake rumble, a low frequency tone would be, well, not heard, but felt by audiences. Having experienced Sense-Around on another theatrical release, it's certainly memorable. Also, it gets highly irritating very quickly. You also have to remember not to swallow any fillings dislodged by the vibration.
Another half hour, I won't feel the one that's supposed to knock California into the ocean.
When a quake of 9.9 on the Richter scale hits, that pretty much guarantees horrendous, widespread devastation. And in this case, boffo box office. 1974 was the peak of disaster films. Universal would go on to crank out several more airport installments, Irwin Allen would go on to make some of his most unloved films, and then there was Meteor, which pretty much ended this cycle of disaster movies.
That could be a worse disaster than the quake itself.
The Richter scale is the traditional way of measuring the magnitude of an earthquake. It's logarithmic rather than linear, as in each number is 10 times the intensity of the previous number. But I prefer to use the Stam Fine scale, which basically measures how quickly my pans are ruined after a tremor. A tremor, as shown in Earthquake, would mean that I would be wearing black pants, sweaters wrapped around my waist, and adult diapers for at least a month.
Yes, I was afraid of that.
In later years, Universal, never wanting to miss a trick, would allow some of its TV shows to reuse footage from this film. The Incredible Hulk, Galactica 1980, and most cheekily of all, Quantum Leap, where Sam leaps into the body of a stuntman on this movie. Coming soon, music inspired by, but in no way is heard on the soundtrack to the movie Earthquake. 20 great hits with an incredibly spurious link to the movie, including Shake Your Tail Feather, Shake It, Shake That, Shake It Up, Shake It Off, Shake Your Groove Thing, Shake, Rattle and Roll, Shake, 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 Shake Your Booty, You Shook Me All Night Long, and My Milkshake Brings All the Boys to the Yard, and more, unfortunately. Earthquake shows us a 9.9, but realistically it's high 7s, low 8s for the era, but I did probably enjoy this more than any other 70s disaster flick, mainly because it feels just that little bit different to the others. It shows us a disaster on a grand scale, but it's a pretty good film at the same time.
I can't talk you out of this insanity.
I really wish you could.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.